Prologue. Night descended on Shonn, quiet and peaceful. The silent stars watched over the kingdom, as they always did. But tonight, the stars weren't the only thing keeping an eye on the kingdom. Since the death of King Finvara and Queen Una of Faerie at Samhain, the kingdom of Shonn had been on edge. For Shonn, the easternmost kingdom in the Gifted Lands, was the one with the strongest ties to the otherworldly realm. The Veil, that magical border that separated Faerie and the Gifted Lands, was just outside Shonn's capital city, and many of the Fae mingled, married, and did business with the humans there. But with the sudden and violent death of the Faerie royals, relations between the two areas had been strained, at best. Just little things. A broken contract between Fae and human merchants, an engagement between a human groom and his Fae bride being called off. Outright violence was unlikely, as Valdon's treaty would keep the Fae from retaliating in physical or magical harm against the citizens of Shonn for the murder of their leaders, even though no one in Shonn was responsible for it. To be a human in Shonn at this point meant being watchful and wary. And sad, over losing dear friends due to politics beyond anyone's control. It was now midwinter, a day of thankful celebration that the winter would soon be over. In the evening, when the festivities were done, the citizens of Shonn settled into their homes. Only when all the occupants of a home were asleep would a household Fae make their appearance, as was their nightly custom. Most households had a brownie who took pride in keeping their chosen home clean, and a pixie who loved keeping their home's garden well tended. Once the moon had risen and all was quiet, Chela the brownie popped up from her favorite hiding spot and sniffed the air. All were asleep. Time to get to work. Whistling a jaunty tune to herself, she bustled to the side window and waved at her friend outside. The pixie smiled and waved back, then turned and put a hand on the cold, hard ground, mouthing something Chela couldn't hear. It was still too early for their humans to plant any seeds, but singing to the earth helped prepare it for that time. Chela grabbed a broom and started sweeping. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something passing by the front window. She stared, but nothing seemed to be there. She shrugged and kept working. The night wasn't getting any younger. Wait. There it was again. What was it? It shouldn't be any of her humans. They were all asleep, worn out from the day's festivities. Maybe it was her human's dog. That animal was sweet. A little silly sometimes, but still quite sweet. But she didn't want it inside, getting underfoot. And worse, tracking dirt all over her nice, newly cleaned floors. But, then again, she didn't want the poor creature to freeze out there. Sighing, she went over to the door and opened it. Here! What was the dog's name again? She could never remember. She only ever heard her humans refer to it as Boy. What an odd name for a dog. Here, boy! Come here, boy! A chill swept over her, but it wasn't from the night air. Even though she called for the dog once more, it didn't appear. Well, she couldn't stand here all night. She had work to do. She closed the door, shivering, but not knowing why. She turned. A short, wordless scream escaped her lips as she felt her mind and body go numb. A presence settled within her, taking control of her. Stiffly, she walked over to the shelf and started pulling books and knickknacks down, tearing out pages and breaking as many decorations as she could. She overturned tables and chairs, raking her sharp nails down the wooden surfaces. The fire in the hearth had gone out. She swept ashes from the hearth into the room, streaking the curtains and walls with soot. Then Chela walked into the kitchen, opening up the pantry and pulling bread and cheese from the shelves, shredding the food as she did so. She grabbed some eggs that lay in a bowl on the table and threw them, watching the yolk streak yellow down the walls. It was still cold enough that her humans could store milk just outside. She opened the door and grabbed the full pitcher, dashing it against the floor. A huge white puddle soon formed at her feet. That would certainly stink in the morning. Chela kept up her destructive whirlwind. Her brownie magic ensured that no matter how much noise she made cleaning, her humans wouldn't hear, so they wouldn't be alerted to this. Unless she wanted them to be. The pixie in the garden peeked into the house, wondering at the noise from inside. Red eyes met her blue ones. She gasped and suddenly knew no more. Within moments, the garden lay in ruins, the earth turned up and scattered, and bits of shattered pots everywhere. The pixie lay near one of the pot shards, unmoving. Inside the house, her brownie counterpart sprawled, face down, in the milk puddle. She did not stir either. Its purpose fulfilled, the gray apparition floated away in search of its next victim. In the morning, Chela's humans awoke to find two strange creatures dead in their home, one in the garden and one near the hearth. They'd never seen their household fae before, although they were aware of their presence, so it took a few moments before they realized who the poor things were. Sad, truly. But strange as well, for all around Shonn, other households were waking up to find that their household fae had also perished in the night. And even stranger, just like in Chela's home, it looked like the household fae had destroyed the homes they had once lovingly kept, before dying inexplicably. What had happened? Who had done this? Would it come for the humans next? And with the death of more fae in the kingdom of Shonn, would more blame fall on the people of the Gifted Lands? Chapter 1. So, when's the big day? I paused, pointing my bow with its nocked arrow down at the ground. My hand relaxed slightly as I pondered Queen Jenica's question. Truthfully, I hadn't given much thought to planning my wedding. I assumed, like so many other things about my relationship with my betrothed, that things would just fall in place somehow, and I wouldn't have to worry about it too much. I shrugged, shaking my head so the wisps of my lavender hair would fall away from my face. My hair was pulled back in its usual braid, but it had an annoying habit of coming loose and getting in the way. I'm not sure. I mean, Reese and I have only been engaged for a few months. Jenica laughed as she raised her own bow, surveying the target ahead. It may only have been a few months, but it took you two over a decade to finally get together. I chuckled as well. She had a point. My friend, now fiancé, Reese and I had practically grown up together in the predominantly Seeker kingdom of Orkwell. Our love was built on a solid foundation of friendship and exasperation, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. You're right. We should probably get going on getting married. Otherwise, it will be another 10 years before we actually walk down the aisle. I raised my bow again and let the arrow fly. It landed with a satisfying thud in the wooden target several yards away. My arrow landed a few inches shy of the center. I nodded, satisfied. Jenica took a deep breath and released her own arrow, which hit the target in the top right-hand corner. She smiled ruefully and wiped her brow. Some tendrils of her dark hair clung to her cheek, and she pushed them away. It might be a while before I get to your level of proficiency, Farrah. Maybe I should just stick with magic. No, Your Majesty. You're actually doing quite well. And besides, you only just started your archery 3 weeks ago. I've been doing this for years. Jenica smirked. Okay, now I know I'm bad at this. You only call me Your Majesty when you're teasing me. I laughed. You can always use your magic to make the arrow shoot perfectly. The Queen gave a mock gasp of horror. That would be cheating. I am determined to learn this archery thing correctly. She giggled. But I'll keep it in mind as a last resort. I put my bow down on the nearby small wooden table and poured a glass of lemon and honey water from the glass pitcher that sat on it. A servant had just delivered the pitcher and 2 glasses, and I wanted a drink while it was still fresh. Ready to take a break? I said, holding the full glass out to Jenica. Yes. She spoke so readily I had to laugh again. The archery lessons were apparently harder than the Queen wanted to admit. I poured the second glass for myself, then took a sip and looked around. King Bain of Calia, Jenica's husband and my friend and former employer, had had a small corner of the castle grounds set up as a private archery range when his wife had expressed an interest in learning. In theory, she could have practiced with the Calian soldiers at their training grounds, and any of the guards would have been happy to instruct their queen. In theory. Calia didn't have a standing army, which also meant they didn't have a place for soldiers to train. Wherever the Callian army, such as it was, sparred, it was somewhere outside of the king's capital where it wouldn't have been wise or safe for the queen to go. Not that Jenica usually had to worry about her safety. As a master-level magician, she could hold her own against all but the strongest mages. And with her ability to shapeshift into a fire-breathing dragon, she could easily wipe out an army. And had, on the occasions when her country was threatened. So she didn't really need to learn how to use any weapons. But when I had asked her why, she had said, "Because even magic fails sometimes, and if something should happen and I couldn't transform into a dragon, well, it's a good idea to have a backup plan." But now I was beginning to think she wanted to learn archery as a not-so-subtle way to question me. "Have you begun any sort of planning?" Jenica asked, after taking a long sip of her lemon and honey water. I shrugged. "Not yet. I think until we know where we're having the wedding, we can't really hammer out any other details." "Where will you have the wedding?" I sighed. "That's really the question, isn't it? Rhys and I both live in Orkwell, but our dearest friends, you and Bayan, live here in Calia." Orkwell, the kingdom directly south of Calia, wasn't so far away that Jenica and Bayan wouldn't be willing to travel to it, but, knowing they couldn't leave their royal duties for too long, Rhys and I didn't want them to be inconvenienced. "Rhys doesn't have any other family left in Bamora?" Jenica asked, naming Rhys's home kingdom. "No, his only family, his cousin Enlar, is here in Calia now. And after our last trip there, I don't think Rhys is too keen to return." Recently, Rhys and I had traveled west to Bamora to rescue Queen Jenica and King Bayan's newborn baby boy, who had been kidnapped by a power-hungry secret society. While the adventure had helped put some painful parts of Rhys's past to rest, it had also stirred up those sad memories to begin with, and I knew Rhys would be happy if he never had to return there. "What about Shonn?" Jenica raised her eyebrows. "Or are there bad memories back there, too?" I took a long sip of my sweetened water, trying to figure out what to say. Shonn, a kingdom in the far eastern part of the Gifted Lands, was where I had been from originally. Although I had been about 6 or 7 when I left, so, honestly, I considered Orkwell more my home than Shonn ever was. Still, Shonn had left its mark on me, in the form of my half-fae blood and the innate magic that came to those of Faerie. "Well, I just sent word to my mother back in Shonn about the engagement," I said. "I'm sure she'll have some opinions on our wedding plans." Jenica snorted, still sounding surprisingly queenly despite the rude sound. Fortunately, my mother was too busy with her own wedding and honeymoon to fuss too much over mine, and I think, after the Prince Anders debacle, she was just as happy to stay away from anything wedding-related. I chuckled. A few years ago, Jenica had been betrothed, against her will, to Anders, and the match had ended in a rather spectacular fashion. "I understand he lives in Shonn now with his wife." I grinned wickedly. "If we decide to hold the wedding in Shonn, I could invite him." Jenica groaned good-naturedly. "Oh, I'll make sure to come to the wedding in dragon form then, and stay in it." The idea of Jenica attending my wedding as a big golden dragon caused me to double over in laughter for several minutes. "Oh dear, I don't know if we'll be able to find a church big enough." Jenica grinned. "Shonn shares a magical border with Faerie, doesn't it? Maybe you should ask the Fae. Perhaps their court would be willing to let you marry on their side of the border. With their magic, they'd definitely be able to accommodate a dragon." Now it was my turn to groan as I picked up my bow. "Oh, no thank you. I want my wedding to be as drama-free as possible." "Tell you what," Jenica waved her bow in the air. "We'll shoot for it." I smirked. "If you insist." At Jenica's wave, I knocked my arrow and sighted. Taking a deep breath, I drew my bow and released the arrow. It flew straight and true, hitting the wood with a loud thump, a mere finger's length from center. I gave Jenica a self-satisfied smile and dipped into a curtsy. "Your turn, Your Majesty." She chuckled, shaking her head at my antics. "You be careful. Pride goes before a fall and all that." I crossed my arms, smirking. Jenica took aim, then loosed her arrow. My eyes widened and my jaw dropped as the smirk fell from my face. Queen Jenica's arrow, for once, had flown just as true as mine, and it had embedded itself in the exact center of the target. The queen turned to me, eyebrows raised and a smile quirking her lips. "Beginner's luck," she said modestly. "Very well done," I commended her. Jenica laughed. "You don't have to talk to the Fae, you know. It was just a joke." "Oh, I know." I eyed Jenica's perfect bullseye again. Even though we had made the wager in jest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost more than just a bet. Thanks for listening. This has been Heir of Secrets and Spectres, Book 5 in the Kingdom Legacy series. Want to know what happens next? Heir of Secrets and Spectres is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and other places you like to get your ebooks, audiobooks, and paperbacks. You can even get a copy at my site, roshni.net. So please pick up a copy and happy reading. Or happy listening.